Once you've seen a Skinwalker, I'm not sure you can return to a civilized society anyway. How can you live knowing there are such evil beings in the world? The road and the land around it are so desolate that they seem to stretch out forever. The road reaches into nothingness, a blurry haze in the distance, while the golden desert lands curve around the earth in a warm embrace. The feeling of emptiness is so consuming, it becomes impossible. How can something be so abandoned, so untouched, so devoid of life? We have spaceships that fly people into space, onto the moon, and pretty soon onto other planets. And you're telling me that we haven't even bothered to explore every nook and cranny of our own plane of existence? There must be something out there in the desert, but we haven't seen so much as a cactus or even a rock for miles now. Where would something be hiding if it did live out here? The day has been fun, driving for miles across the seemingly endless desert trail. Just the four of us, singing and jamming along to the radio and chewing the fat in between. But now it's starting to get dark. The sun is a dwindling ball against the purple sky, its rays giving way to shadows, which cast themselves ominously across the Arizona desert. And we should be setting up in some small unknown town, not still driving with miles and miles of open roads still stretching out all around us. How long will it be before we happen upon somewhere to stay? Jesus, whose idea was this in the first place? Shouldn't a boys' weekend away be to somewhere fun, like the city or something? Something runs out in front of the car from, it seems quite literally, out of nowhere. A large creature, yet slinking around like a serpent, moving with the speed of a cheetah. It bounded with 4 legs across the dusty desert track and was gone within seconds. But, startled by its sudden appearance and by the cries of warning from my companions, my reflexes kicked in and I slammed on the brakes. However, so close was the creature in the few seconds that it had passed by in front of the car, I knew braking alone would not be enough to spare it from a horrific accident. And my mind had not yet processed everything that had happened enough to know that the creature was already out of harm's way. So I also twisted the steering wheel to the right, and the car veered before screeching to a halt, kicking up dirt and dust all around it, obscuring our view momentarily. When the dust finally started to settle, dissipating like a dense fog, it did so slowly due to the lack of wind out here in the scorching desert. We could see that the car was now placed across the road rather than facing down it. The silence was all around us, with the roar of the engine having ceased, as well as the radio and our chattering and singing voices, coupled well with the lifeless area we found ourselves in. At least before we had our voices, the rattle of the car, the singing on the radio. Now there was nothing. Just dead silence. We continued to sit for a few moments in uncomfortable silence, perhaps waiting for something outside to happen. The return of the animal I had almost killed, another car to come along. But that animal was the first sign of life we had seen in miles. And we had not come across other drivers since we had started bumping along the desert. When the silence broke, it shattered, because all of us started to talk at the same time. Well, it wasn't so much talking as it was babbling like dazed and confused madmen. I was putting forward a defense about how dark it was and how the thing had just come out of nowhere. My friend in the passenger seat was in between huffs and nervy breath, saying that we should turn around and head back to the last town we had driven through, where we had only stopped for gas and a quick bite to eat. Something about those nervy breaths and the way his eyes were wide and glazed over, not moving from the road, which was now to either side of us, remember, told me he'd gotten a better look than I had at the thing we'd almost hit. The two in the back were rambling about the car and just trying to get it started up again so we could get the hell off this trail we'd suddenly found ourselves stuck on. As my three friends all continued to rant and shout over each other, I started to inspect the car, thinking that I'd stalled it or that it had exerted itself when I slammed on the brakes and made it turn forcefully to the side at the same time. This wasn't an old car. We made sure we got something fairly new for our trip, otherwise it would have failed us somewhere along the line. But what had happened here? I turned the key in the ignition and there was nothing, not even the sputter of the engine or the lighting up of the dashboard. Absolutely nothing happened. Not one flicker of life from the car. After about the third attempt at starting the car up, I realized that everyone else had stopped talking and were now focused on me, waiting with their breath held as the realization dawned on them that we were stuck, at least for the time being. While they all took their phones out and tried to get a signal, I slowly made my way out of the car. I gently pushed the door open, little by little, just waiting for something to leap out of the darkness again and try to get into the car. I asked if someone could shine a light using their phone, and they did. We didn't need all three of them trying to get a signal, did we? If they were all struggling, then it was pretty obvious that it was just a dead trail. We either had to get the car moving, or wait it out until someone else came along, and God knows how long that'll be. Finally, I had the car door fully open, but I still waited a few moments, waiting for something to appear in the phone's torchlight and howl at the moon or something. Of course, nothing came, so I steadily made my way out of the car, motioning for the torch-carrying friend to come with me. They did, without much hesitation, while the other two continued to tap away on their phones and hold them up as high as they could. The two of us made it around to the front of the car, and he shone his light on it, illuminating and highlighting the horrors that awaited us there. Both of the front tires were flat, rubber hanging limply like torn shreds of paper, and the grille and the bonnet had 3 long, wide gaping holes running down them, as though 3 massive claws had... How had the animal had time to do this? Is this why the car turned so violently? It wasn't me turning the wheel. It was the beast taking a swipe at the car with a mighty claw that I didn't see? We both stood there, looking at the damage to the car, before turning to each other and then back to our friends who were still desperately tapping away on their phones. They were completely unaware of the thing that was hunched down low at the side of the car. I can only describe it as a thing, because beyond that, it's indescribable, a creature unlike any I, and I'd wager any other man, has ever seen before. It had a snout, I can tell you that much, and its black nose was twitching, dancing almost, from side to side, as it closed in on the meat it could smell contained within the metal construction it had attacked. The two of us outside of the car, our urge was naturally to cry out, but to do so would have alerted the monstrosity to our presence, and we would have become its focus. And we did not have the protection of the car like our two companions did. The sun was completely gone by now, but when the beast leaped up onto the top of the car, it was illuminated by the moonlight. That's when I saw, with mounting terror, that this was a human, or it had been a human. Its body was long and stretched out, the skin taut and the bones threatening to pierce through the skin. Its arms and legs were also long, thin and bony, but on the ends of the arms and legs were gargantuan paws, claws with sharp, hooked nails on the end of each of the fingers. The nails were beginning to slice through the metal as though it were a sheet of thin paper. Our friends finally noticed what was happening. They started to panic and tried to scramble out of the car. We should have rushed to help them, but what could we do? This thing was twice our size, ferociously fast and superiorly strong. If it could cut through a car with its claws like scissors through paper, what would it do to us? Just as the monster, part man, part animal, plunged one of its enormous claws into the vehicle and grabbed one of the inhabitants by the head. I was grabbed by my torch-carrying companion, and he turned me around and started to run, motioning for me to follow him down the road and away from the car. But the empty trail became one of terror, for there were others, and they were closing in. Indescribable beings, varying in size and shape and form. All had the same distinct human features, but all had something different about them. Some were pale and hairless. Others were coated from head to toe in thick and heavy fur. Some had snouts, others did not. But they all had one thing in common: razor-sharp claws, mouths that were full of fangs as big as knives, and the eyes. Yellow, pure, unfiltered yellow, shining as brightly as the sun had been earlier. A fiery, blazing orb in the sky. The creatures moved unnaturally, on all fours. No doubt they couldn't stand on two legs because of how lengthened and lumpy their bodies had become. They circled and closed in on us, and I, being the focus of none of these monsters for the time being, ran out of the trail of terror and across the sandy desert lands. Isn't it the case in all horror movies that you have to stay on the track? Well, apparently not in real life. Although, it felt like I was in some sort of movie. A nightmare, actually. I ran and ran and ran until I collapsed and blacked out from the heat. Although through the night, I really did have nightmares. My friends, all three of them, screaming, before I woke up to that big blazing ball of fire in the sky. I walked for 2 days until I finally came across a small town. A closed-off community that were apprehensive at first, but were kind enough to take me in and nurse me back to full health. I'm still here now, all these years later. You're not allowed to leave. Once you've seen a Skinwalker, I'm not sure you can return to a civilized society anyway. How can you live knowing there are such evil beings in the world? Instead, me and these people, one of the earliest indigenous tribes of these states, intend to hunt down their ancestors who used their power for greed, for bad. There are others like me here with similar stories, and we're all agreed. The Trail of Terror must be destroyed.